Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching this week. But before we get started, I do have quite a bit of exciting news for you. We do have a few new announcements and bits of news that I think you might be interested in, with the first one being that there is a new campaign announced for 7th Citadel. This is going to be introducing a new expansion as well as a bunch of extra content that you'll be able to mix into the game. And this is a game that I've been playing almost every single week and often multiple times a week as I've been playing through the first threat offered in the game, and I've absolutely been loving this game. It's probably going to end up in my top 20 or maybe even my top 10 games of all time, but I will have to play a little bit more to really figure out where it falls. But they did an amazing job with this one, and it's definitely my favorite campaign game so far, so I really do recommend this one. Definitely not for everyone, so make sure that you watch some playthroughs or reviews and understand how the game plays, but I will most definitely be grabbing whatever is new in this campaign. But we do also have an announcement for Rayman the board game, and even if you aren't interested in this IP, you might still be interested in this game because it is coming from the same designer that designed the game Earth. And this is a game that's been getting rave reviews over the past year, and it's no surprise. I have played this one and it's fantastic, and if you want to know how this one plays, we actually have an expansion for it launching this week. So spoiler alert, I will be going into more details on this one later in this video, so make sure you stay tuned for that. But I imagine Rayman the board game is going to be playing quite a bit different than Earth, because it says here that this is a game where players are going to be going on an adventure, teaming up with their favorite heroes in an epic race, dodging dangers, and saving the teensies. That's pretty much all the info I could find on this one. I'm not sure if that means it's going to be a cooperative game or if it's going to be a competitive racing game, but if you are interested in this one, you can go ahead and subscribe to get updates on its development. This next one is one that I'm personally very interested in, and this one's called Ironwood. And the first reason that I'm so interested in this one is that it is coming from Mindclash Games, that always does fantastic work with all the games that they've released. But their games do tend to be quite heavy and require quite a lot of effort in order to get to the table. But when it comes to this one, they actually mention on the Board Game Geek page that this is a rules-light, highly asymmetric, card-driven tactical card game for 1 to 2 players. And a lighter game from this company is something that I'm very interested in, especially because it is a 2-player game. So I'm really interested to learn more about this one and hopefully add another 2-player game to the collection. And just when I thought I was all tapped out on campaign games, Dragori Games just announced their next campaign, which is Odalin, the Dungeons of Doom. And this one is bringing a lot of really interesting ideas to the table. First of all, I just wanted to mention this. This is amazing, and I really love what they're doing here, and I wish I would see this with more campaigns, because they are actually unlocking rewards just based on the amount of followers that follow along with this campaign. No bullcrap attempts to try and take your money in advance or sign you up to different email lists or take your personal information. Just good old-fashioned respectful marketing, which honestly sounds like an oxymoron at this point. But they do also have this text down here saying to check out how you can level up down below, so let's see what that is. And I already did check it out, and it's pretty cool because it's just a bunch of different ways that you can contribute to those stretch goals in advance. And there's some really fun ideas here as well, because anytime that any reviewer mentions this campaign in one of their videos, it's going to help make progress towards those stretch goals. So just by me saying this right now, we're actually doing that, so look at us go. But Dragori Games is a team that has pretty much just a single series of games under their belt, being the Arena of the Contest, which was followed by the Tenaris Adventures, and then they also did do a campaign for the Tenaris RPG, which I am not really much into RPGs. I do like them, I just don't really play them very often, but I did back that campaign because once I looked into it, I thought it was really impressive, the ideas that they had and the way that they're delivering it. So I'm actually really looking forward to hopefully getting that one to the table sometime soon. But they've done a great job with their campaigns in the past, and each of their games have all been very highly regarded by different reviewers in the community. And this is a team that's proven that they can succeed with ambitious projects. And this one's no exception, because not only are you going to have a ton of content and miniatures, but there's also a bunch of really interesting mechanisms and different components that facilitate those new ideas. Because in this one, your heroes are actually forging a pact with a demon, and you're going to be able to combine cards together in order to modify the effects of those cards and upgrade them and have all sorts of effects that you'll be able to play around with as you play throughout the campaign. And as players are defeating monsters, they're going to be gaining different souls and corruption that they can actually use to transform into their demon forms. Of course, there's going to be all sorts of decisions and different branching points depending on the player's successes and failures. They seem to put a lot into their games and take the due diligence to do it right, make sure that everything's well play tested, and most of all fun. So if you are interested with this one, you can go ahead and follow along with it now. And one last really fun update here is that Grant Lyon did hit 10k subscribers since the last video that we posted, so thanks a lot to all of you that did go ahead and check out his channel and subscribe and help him get over that milestone. If you're not familiar with his content, he posts a lot of videos just like mine, but focuses on retail games. But he's also a comedian, so there's lots of comedy mixed in and things like that, and he does do several other videos as well. If you haven't checked him out yet, I do have a link to his channel in the description down below, and he will be putting out a special video announcing his 10k milestone accomplishment, and it does look like it's going to be pretty funny, so you'll probably want to check that out. If you're looking for even more updates on retail games, you can also go ahead and check out QVO Games, and I'll have a link to his channel in the description down below as well. And as always, I do like to give a quick mention to Alex over at Boardgame Co, because him and I do work together keeping track of all these upcoming campaigns, and he puts out a video at the start of each month letting you know of the heavy hitters for that month. And of course, he puts out a ton of other content and follow-up content to those games as developments are made. If you're interested in the historical war games, there's a whole other world for that, and I don't dive too deep into it, but Mike over at Zilla Blitz definitely does. So if you want to get updates on those games and those announcements, you'll definitely want to check out his channel. And I'll have a link to all of these content creators in the description below, and they're all great people, so definitely go ahead and give them a subscribe if you do like their content. Well, that's it for an intro, and we do got a few exciting games this week, so let's check them out. And the first one we got here is called Party Wanted, and this one is a cooperative deck building drinking game where players are each going to be choosing their own hero at the start of the game with their own deck of cards and special abilities and stats, and then player order is going to be determined by the speed of your character. But essentially, players are going to be setting up various dungeons in a pyramid with a final boss at the top of that pyramid, and players are going to be taking turns starting from the bottom of that pyramid, choosing a card to resolve, and then moving into the next tier in that pyramid. Each card that a player reveals is going to have 3 different challenges: a social challenge that's going to give you some sort of special ability if you can follow the instructions for that challenge, and then some sort of action challenge, which is what you actually need to accomplish in order to continue through the dungeon. And then there's going to be a drinking challenge, which is going to cause you to drink. But a lot of these challenges are going to force you to fight against all sorts of different enemies, and they're going to have different stats associated with them as well. And players are going to be using cards from their hand to combat with these different enemies. And of course, there will also be a boss on each level of the dungeon, and each dungeon is going to have a progressively more difficult boss for you to go up against. If the players are able to beat that very final boss, then they win the game. And if you are interested in this one, you can go ahead and check it out, and I'll have it linked in the description down below. And launch on April 22nd, we have the Strange Shadows expansion launching for the game The Black Sonata, which, if you're not familiar with, was originally a solo game, but this new expansion is going to be taking that up to 2 players. But this is a really interesting solo game because this is actually a solo deduction and hidden movement game. I don't think I've ever seen that done before, and the way that this game actually accomplishes that is pretty ingenious and really, really interesting. But the way this game works is that players are trying to discover the Dark Lady, which is a person that was referenced in a few of Shakespeare's works, but no one really knows who she is. But the Dark Lady is going to be moving around the map from a location to an adjacent location as instructed by a deck of cards. And there's a few different orientations that you can use to set up the deck of cards so that if you do play this game over several different sessions, you're not going to be getting the same sequence of events with her moving to the same cities over again. As you're drawing those cards and seeing where she's moving around on the map, each one of those cards is going to have an icon on it indicating the current location where she currently is. Unfortunately, multiple locations can share icons, so there's multiple possibilities where she could be for a given card, and this is why it's really important to look at the sequence of cards as they're coming out, because you're going to be starting to eliminate different possibilities depending on what's actually possible out on the map. Every time you draw a card, you'll also have the opportunity to move your pawn to a new location, and if you think you are at the same location as the Dark Lady, you can perform the search action, which is where a really cool mechanism comes into play because you're going to be taking the card that you just drew, and then you're going to be combining it with the card associated with the name on that location. The location cards each have a hole in them, and then you're going to be placing that card on top of the card you just drew. And if you see a lady's face there, then that means you are at the correct location. This is going to allow you to gain a clue card, which is essentially one of the Dark Lady cards that wasn't chosen for the game, but each of these cards is going to have a set of icons associated with them, and there's only a certain amount of each icon within the Dark Lady deck. So once you start to get more of these cards, you can start to eliminate the possibilities of the Dark Ladies depending on the combinations that are coming up. The Dark Lady that is chosen for the game is actually going to be face down on the left-hand side of the board with one of her icons revealed on the back of that card, giving you an additional clue of what you're looking for. But the game continues like this until you can determine who the Dark Lady is, and if you get to that point, then you win the game. But if you run out of search cards, or if you go through that movement deck too many times, then you're going to be losing the game. But this new expansion is going to be adding a second player, but it's also going to be adding new Dark Ladies with new mechanisms and also new ways to travel across the map. And of course, there's going to be a bunch of new cards and also a varying difficulty. And if you are interested to learn more about this one, I will have it linked in the description down below. Also launching on the 22nd, we have the Abundance expansion for the game Earth, and this is going to be adding a bunch of new cards that you can mix into the game, but it's also going to be adding a sixth player. But if you're not familiar with this game, this is a very popular game for good reason, and it is also our Discord pick of the week, and it is also my own personal pick of the week as well. And there are a lot of reasons why I think this game is so good, and I'll just come out and say it. This one absolutely kills Wingspan for me. I would never buy Wingspan because I would just buy this game instead. It features a lot of the same mechanisms where you're building out your tableau, with each of those cards giving you different actions and abilities. But what I love about this game is that no matter whose turn it is, every player is involved, which means that there's very little downtime. And also, for a game about plants, this one has quite a lot more meat on it. Compared to Wingspan, I feel like this one's giving me a lot more meaningful decisions, and this one also does have a couple extra layers on it with the different ways that you can use your cards. That does give you more options on your turn. Just placing your cards into the tableau actually comes with quite a lot of nuance, whereas in a game like Wingspan, you kind of just have to put your bird in a certain row. But in this one, where you put the card into your tableau matters a lot because it can affect all the cards around it. The cards are going to be granting you victory points by growing out the vegetation indicated by these cubes, and also by growing trees vertically indicated by these trees. But then cards can also grant you victory points based on specific objectives for those cards. This makes me really happy because I'm never in that position that I often find myself in Wingspan, where I just continually lay eggs to get victory points at the end of the game, not really making any decisions at all. And I don't mean to knock on Wingspan. It is an excellent game, and it is a game that I'm happy to play anytime, and I always do have fun playing it. But when it comes to Wingspan or this game, it's a pretty easy answer for me because Wingspan I think is just okay, whereas this game I think is a really great design and has really fun decisions throughout the entirety of the game. And like I said, it's just as easy to get to the table. But before I explain how the expansion works, first I'll let you know how this one plays, because this one is a resource management tableau builder where players are going to be building out their own ecosystems with different flora, fauna, and fungi. And I've only ever played this one competitively, but I believe it does have cooperative and solo modes as well. But at the start of the game, each player is going to be dealt a double-sided climate, island, and ecosystem card, and then they're going to be choosing one side to keep face up over the entirety of the game. This is going to dictate what sort of starting resources they get, as well as their abilities, and also the different scoring objectives that they're going to be trying to fulfill. Each turn, players are going to be alternating as the active player, and then they're going to be choosing one of the 4 actions to perform, with each of the actions being associated with a different color. One thing to note with this is that the active player is going to be getting the major benefit of that action, but then all the other players are going to be getting the secondary effect of that action. Not only this, but it also activates all the cards in your tableau that also match the color of that action. The different actions allow you to do all sorts of different things, like gaining new cards into your hand, putting them out into your tableau, or even discarding cards into your compost, which essentially acts as victory points for the end of the game. Players can also use actions to place out different tokens onto their cards, which indicate different growth of brush, flowers, and trees growing over time, and these can all grant you victory points at the end of the game, depending on what other cards you have in your ecosystem and the different synergies that you might have between them. The end of the game is triggered as soon as a player has a 4x4 grid of 16 cards, and then the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. The new expansion is going to be adding a bunch of new ideas into the game, and like I said before, it will also be adding components for up to 6 players, but there's going to be a ton of new cards to mix into the game, including the new event cards, which is already a card offered in the game, but the current ones only affect the player that plays them, whereas these new event cards, you can actually play them to affect all the players, or even pick and choose which they affect. There's a new mechanism that allows you to store your sprouts for a second turn, which gives you a little bit more flexibility as you play the game. But the big change here is definitely the addition of the new seeds resource, which is a change that I'm a huge fan of because I think it's going to speed up the game, making this even easier to get to the table if you have limited time. But this is a multi-use resource that you can convert into almost any other thing in the game. You can convert it into sprouts, soil, growth, or even compost. And you can also use it for a new germination action, which essentially allows you to search through the deck for whichever card that you want so that you can find the exact cards you need for your synergies and your tableau, and hopefully get you the most victory points at the end of the game. But if you are interested in this one, definitely check it out, and I will have it linked down below, and of course you can click to get notified. And launch on the 23rd, we have Biohazard, and this is a competitive game that basically combines the mechanisms with Ticket to Ride with the mechanisms from Pandemic. So if you're ever wondering what that might look like, I think this gives you a pretty good idea, because on your turn, you're going to be able to use actions to draw cards of different colors into your hand, just like in Ticket to Ride. And then you're going to be combining those cards together in certain combinations in order to place different walls and quarantine zones out on the main map. You'll be able to gain points for each wall of your color that you're able to put out on the map. Then you'll also gain points for completely zoning in certain areas, essentially creating a quarantine zone that the pandemic can't get into. Because in this game there is a global pandemic, and it's going to be showing up on the board and spreading throughout the different adjacent regions. And the way this works is at the end of a player's turn, they're going to be able to choose one of the groups of virus tokens out on the board, and then you're going to be rolling dice, which is going to dictate how that virus spreads. So you'll probably want to pick the groups of virus to spread that are more likely to cause your opponents to lose points rather than yourself. There's also additional victory points at the end of the game to whoever was able to put down the most walls, and then the game ends once all the regions are full of either a virus or a lockdown token. And then the player with the most victory points at that time wins the game. And if you are interested in this one, you can check it out. I'll have it linked down below. Also on the 23rd, we have another game with some really interesting mechanisms, and this one is called Cores of Discovery, and this one is based on the comic book series with the same name. But this is a cooperative game of deduction and adventure, as players are going to be exploring a map and deducing where different items are on the map according to different restrictions and requirements. And then players are going to be using that information to try and achieve different objectives, get their troops out on the board, and also fight against monsters. The game offers a bunch of different scenarios with different win and loss conditions, and each scenario is going to come with its own map that you're going to be sliding into a triple layer board, and then you're going to be removing sections of the board to reveal it as you play the game. But each map also comes with its own set of conditions indicating what types of locations you'll find there and what locations are able to be beside other locations, or how many locations can be in a single row or column, or maybe even just exist on the map in general. You're going to be using all this information to kind of deduce what you think is in your unexplored spaces based on the spaces that you already explored. So if you're familiar with Minesweeper, this is very similar to that, except this one has a lot more nuance and detail with it, with a lot of different locations having different effects, and with the conditions changing depending on the scenario that you're playing. As a team, you're going to have your final goals, which might be to defeat a certain amount of monsters or get a certain amount of troops out on the map, but there's also smaller objectives that you're going to be trying to achieve throughout the game, because there's going to be a bunch of cards at the top of the board that, as you're taking the tokens out of the board to unveil the location, you're going to be adding those tokens onto the card, and once there's a certain amount of those tokens on the card, it's going to activate that card, triggering any of its effects. And these cards can have different requirements that if you're able to meet those, you could get a positive effect or just avoid a negative effect. The players will be continuing the game like this, taking turns exploring different regions on the board, and also taking advantage of any gear that they find or their special abilities of their character. And if they're able to meet the goals of the scenario, then they win the game. And if you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked in the description down below. Also on the 23rd, we have Project L Square One, which is a standalone sequel to the game Project L, which is a game that a ton of people love. And it's a game where you're going to be trying to complete different objective cards by getting different polyominoes and filling in the spaces of those cards. The cool thing about this game is that it is a bit of an engine builder, because anytime that you complete a card, you actually get all your polyominoes back, and then you can reuse them in following objectives. This new version of the game doesn't exactly use polyominoes like the original. Instead, you're going to be using these tokens that actually have different polyominoes printed on them. But before I get into explaining how this game plays, I'll first let you know how the original game played, because there are a lot of similarities here, and I did already cover the original in a previous video, so I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And this is a polyomino tile placement game where players are going to be competing to complete different shapes, starting with just 2 tiles to their name. But then throughout the game, as you're completing new shapes, you'll actually gain new polyominoes, but then you'll also be able to reuse the ones that you used in any of the shapes that you've already completed. This means that you'll actually be building a little bit of an engine that's going to open up new shapes to you to build, and as you gain more, of course, you'll be able to complete those bigger shapes. This new expansion is going to be adding new shapes into the game, but these are going to be appearing later in the game, and they are designed for the purpose to allow those smaller shapes to still be useful even in the late game. Not only that, but this also expands the player count to 6 players, and as I mentioned, this isn't the only expansion for this game, and I did cover the previous expansion and this game in the past in the previous campaign, so if you want to know even more details, I'll just go ahead and roll that footage for you now. And Project L is a fast-paced engine-building strategy game where you're completing puzzles to earn points. Each puzzle that you complete is going to earn you more pieces to complete harder puzzles, but then the pieces you use to complete those puzzles you also get to keep. So you can see how this builds your engine as the game progresses. You're going to want to be optimizing your actions better than your opponents so that you can complete harder puzzles at the end of the game. If you can build up a sufficient engine of pieces for completing multiple puzzles at once, you can actually unleash the master action, which lets you put a piece on all your puzzles with only one action. This campaign is also going to offer the Finesse expansion, which is going to add some extra objectives to the game, and when you complete those, you earn yourself some coins, which you can spend to perform extra actions on your turn. Now that you know how the original Project L plays, this one plays very similar to that, except there's going to be a few small differences. Basically, in this one, you're still going to be trying to complete these different objective cards, and on a turn, you'll be able to take 3 actions in order to try and do that. One of those actions could be to draft a new objective card into your tableau to try and complete, but how you actually get the tokens to complete that objective is with the next action, which is just to take a yellow token into your supply. And these yellow tokens have a single square on them, and they're basically the building blocks of any other token that you need in this game, and they're the only ones that you're able to get directly from the supply. Because if you need one of these green tokens, which has 2 squares, or this orange one that has 4, you actually have to combine other tokens together by using one of your other actions, which is the join action. So if you wanted to get this green one, you'd first have to get 2 yellow tokens, and then use the join action to trade those in for a green. There's also an action that allows you to split tokens into their smaller counterparts, and then there's also an action to, of course, place them out on your board. And anytime you're doing that, you always have to place them from top to bottom, and once you do complete one of these boards, you have the option to cash it in for the victory points outlined on that board, but you do need to use an action in order to do so, and you can cash in multiple boards at once with a single action, so it is more efficient for you to do it that way. And also this could earn you some bonus victory points because there's going to be a limited supply of these tokens, and whichever players are able to complete 2, 3, or 4 boards in a single action are going to be taking those tokens first, so there is a little bit of race going on here, trying to get those tokens while also trying to complete your boards in order to have the most victory points once the game ends. Just like with the original version of this game, any of the tokens that you use to complete an objective do come back to you once you cash them in, so there is that pressure there as well to try and do all of this quickly so that the other players aren't taking the objective boards that you want and just completing a ton of boards for victory points while you're trying to get a set of 4. If this one sounds interesting to you, you'll probably want to know that there's also going to be some expansions offered in the campaign as well, and as always I do have a link to the campaign down in the description below. Also launching on the 23rd, we have Dance of the Muses, and this is a competitive game where there's going to be 9 different tiles evenly distributed across the players, and then if there's an extra one, it's going to be going into the center of the table, and then each player is going to be assigned with a different colored pool of dice, and then players are going to be taking turns putting their tiles into the center of the table so that they are connected to one of the tiles already out on the table, either orthogonally or diagonally. For each tile that a player puts out, they're also going to be putting a die of their color on that tile, indicating that that one belongs to them. All the dice do start out with a value of 1, and the tiles don't necessarily have to be in a 9x9 grid like this. They could be in any shape whatsoever, so long as all of them are touching in some way. As the players put their tiles into play, it is required that each player puts one of their tiles into play face down so that the more generic side is visible. Once all the tiles are in play, you're going to be moving into the second phase of the game, where players are going to be taking turns moving a tile one space, and then taking that tile's special ability, either after or before they moved it. When you do move a tile, they do push any tiles that they bump into, and you're allowed to do this so long as no tile ends up disconnected from the rest of the board. There's all sorts of different abilities offered with these tiles, but they're mostly going to be manipulating the value of the dice on the surrounding tiles according to some sort of pattern. Players will be taking advantage of these abilities, trying to increase the value of the dice on their tiles. The end of the game is triggered as soon as a single die reaches the value of 6, and then you're going to be tallying up your victory points. But at this point, the hidden Muse are also going to be revealed, and the way that they work is that they don't have any special abilities on them, but they are a great way to get additional victory points, because each of these tiles does have a number of suns located on the top of the tile, and if you're able to get the value of the die on that tile to match that number of suns at the end of the game, then that die is automatically going to be worth a 6, granting you with a lot more victory points. Except for the scoring doesn't exactly work like I've been leading on here, because you don't actually get the victory points equal to the value of the die. Instead, at the end of the game, all the players are going to be arranging their dice in descending order, and then players are going to be comparing the value of their dice one by one from left to right, and whichever player has the absolute highest value for each of those is going to be gaining 1 victory point. This means that having more 6s and having more higher value dice than your opponents is going to help secure you the win. This means that having more 6s is going to do a lot to help secure you the win. And of course, if this one does sound interesting to you, you can go ahead and check it out, and I will have it linked down below. Also on the 23rd, we have Firesiege, a Firala story, and this is a cooperative game where players are going to be working together to fight back against hordes of enemies. But what's really interesting about this game and the way that the cooperative aspect works is that players are going to be using cards on their turn to perform actions, but these cards are actually double-sided, and both sides of the card matter. The catch here is that you're only allowed to look at the one side of your card, so you're going to have to use information from your fellow players to try and figure out which ones they would like you to use and which ones they might want you to avoid. They're not allowed to tell you what exactly is on those cards, so you're going to have to weigh what they're telling you with what you want to do to try and decide which cards you actually want to play. This is a campaign that did launch a few months back, and I did already cover this one, so I will go ahead and roll that footage for you, but I just wanted to mention that they did pull this one down to make improvements and improve on the pricing, so if you did check this one out when it originally launched, I definitely want to check it out again and potentially grab it at the reduced pricing. But I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage, and you can check out the campaign. I'll have it linked in the description down below. But essentially in this game, players are working together to essentially defend a tower in the center of the board, because as the enemy gets activated, they're going to be moving down these 3 different paths that you can see that are yellow, red, and green, and then slowly making their way to the center of the board. Players are going to lose if any of the enemies reach the center, or if an enemy needs to be spawned but there's no more left in the supply, or if a hero dies. And then finally, if they run out of time, because there is a time tracker that's going to be advancing periodically throughout the game. But the interesting aspect of this game comes with the player's actions, because each player is going to be playing as their own individual hero, but then each player is going to have their own upgrades and special abilities that they can unlock, as well as their own set of action tiles. And the cool thing here is that players are always going to have 3 action tiles to choose from on their turn, and they're always just going to be picking one to activate. But you're going to be drawing these from a bag, and one side of the tile is going to have the actions that you can perform, then the other side of the tile is going to have the instructions for the enemy activation. So whatever tile that you do end up choosing to activate is not only going to determine your actions, but also the actions of the enemy. But the cool thing here is that I said you will be drawing these from a bag, and whatever side of the tile that you see first is the only side that you're allowed to look at. So you're going to be putting these in a little stand in front of you so that you can see that side. When it's your turn, you're going to be choosing one of these tiles to activate with only partial information, but the other players are allowed to tell you which tiles that they would prefer more than others, but they can't tell you exactly what they see on the tile. So you're going to have to use their bit of information with the information you have to try and determine which tile that you want to choose. Of course, these actions are going to help you push back against the enemies in various ways, and the way that you do that is by deploying different units out on the board, moving those units to strategic locations, and then attacking the enemy or the enemy nests. Players normally aren't able to move through the walls in this game, so you can also perform actions to breach walls or to repair the walls as well to prevent any enemies from taking shortcuts. And then these actions can also have other effects like raising your stats on various different tracks. And these tracks are very important because they're going to affect the power of your main actions, such as moving, deploying, and attacking, because there's a movement track that's going to dictate how much movement you get when you perform that movement action. And then there's the deploy track that's going to dictate how many units you can put out with a single deploy action. And then of course the attack track will have a damage modifier, allowing you to perform more or less damage depending on where you are on that track. Also, there are a few different types of units that players can deploy out on the board. There are your main hero units, and then there are these support units that do add additional strength and attack power if they are in the same location where you are attacking. During attack, you're also going to be rolling a die that can have other effects and modifiers to that attack, adding a little bit of luck into the equation. The cool thing about these tracks is that they are another thing to link players together in the cooperative experience because they are shared tracks, which means that some players might increase certain stats, while other players might spend those stats in order to upgrade or perform some special actions. The game also starts with drawing 6 different goal cards that players are going to have to complete in order to win the game, with each of those having different requirements in order to fulfill that goal. Of course, drawing different combinations of these goal cards will change your strategy and add variety from game to game as you try to fulfill their unique objectives. And I will have this campaign linked in the description below. And launching on April 25th, we have Waddle Waddle, which is a game about wildlife research and conservation. And in this game, each player is going to be playing as a scientist with their own specialist of a certain breed of penguin. And then you're going to be gaining some special actions or abilities whenever you take actions related to that penguin. And something that's really cool about the different pictures here is that the designers do actually work in wildlife conservation. And these pictures were taken by them and their team when they went on an expedition to the South Pole. But the way the game actually plays is that players are going to be taking turns performing just one action on their turn, and one of the main actions is to draft a card into your hand. The way this works is that the different cards come in different colors depending on the type of penguin on that card, and then each of the types of penguins can come in a value ranging from 1 to 6. Players are going to be drafting these cards to try and create different sets of penguin, with the larger sets giving you more victory points. You can create sets by having penguin of the same value, or of the same color, or even creating runs of sequential numbers. It does also cost an action in order to cash in a set of penguin for the victory points, so you do want to be efficient when you do this. But a really cool mechanism here is that when you do that, you'll be assigning a location to score those victory points. And you're going to be gaining additional victory points for every pair of penguin of the same type that also match one of the penguin on that location. There is sort of a limit to the number of times each location can actually be used, so players are going to be racing to try and use these locations first. Or if you think one of the locations is getting more difficult to gain access to because it's been used too many times, you might try to get penguin into your set that will allow you to score points at one of the other locations. One thing to note about cashing in your sets for victory points is that you can actually optimize this by cashing in 2 sets at once, but in order to do that, you have to use up all the cards in your hand. And if you're not able to get that absolutely perfect and you end up having an extra card in your hand, then you're only going to be able to cash in a single set. And anytime that you do that, you actually have to discard all the other cards in your hand back to the drafting pool, which means that there is a little bit of a push your luck aspect here when you are trying to optimize for multiple sets. Luckily, there are actions you can use to mitigate this, to return cards from your hand back to the pool, or even swap cards from your hand with the pool. But of course, this is less efficient than just trying to get everything right the first time. And the game continues like this, with players drafting cards into their hand, trying to create different sets, and then cashing those sets in for victory points. And of course, anytime that you're drafting cards, you're going to be replenishing them from the main deck. And this is important because each round in this game is going to have 4 threat cards shuffled into that deck, and anytime that a player draws one of those cards, they'll be able to use it for its powerful special ability. Once all 4 of those have been drawn, that's going to be triggering the end of that round, and then you're going to be going into scoring and then resetting up the next round and then continuing until the end of the game. Then the player with the most victory points at that point wins the game. If you are interested in this one, you can check it out. I'll have it linked in the description down below. Also on the 25th, we have Prowl, Clans, and Cunning, and this one's a competitive card game where players are going to be dealt a hand of cards at the start of the game, with each of the cards being associated with a certain faction, and then also having a special ability. The cool thing about this game is that these are all the cards you get through the entirety of the game, so you really want to think about how you use those cards, and you really want to be efficient with them, because what you're trying to do in this game is have your allied faction be ranked higher than any of your opponents at the end of the game. The way this works is that once all players have been dealt their hand of cards, they're going to be choosing one of those cards to put face down in front of them, and this represents the faction that you're currently allied with, but this isn't a permanent commitment, and this can change throughout the game. Players take turns performing just one action on their turn, and there's just 3 different options to choose from. You can either play a card from your hand to use its special ability, but then whatever color that card is, it's also going to bump up that faction in the rankings. If you're feeling like your allied faction just isn't looking too hot, then you can also use an action to discard your face down card and replace it with one from your hand. But the last action that you can choose to perform is to discard one of the cards from your hand in order to try and guess the faction of another player's face down card. If you guess incorrectly, they can just tell you you're wrong, but if you are correct, they have to discard that card and replace it with another one from their hand, which could potentially force them to change which faction they're currently allied with. The game continues like this until all cards from players' hands have been played, and then all the players are going to be revealing their face down card, and whichever one ranks highest in the faction wins the game. If it's a tie, then it's the player with this token that wins the game, and there are different abilities that allow you to gain that. As always, if you want to check this one out, I do have it linked in the description below. And launching on April 6th, we have the 6th Realm, and this one is the big Euro game of the week, and I think this one has some really interesting mechanisms, but this one is a competitive game with a lot going on the main board. But something that's really cool about this board is that even though there's a lot going on there, you're actually only concerned with 3 different regions, because this board's broken into a bunch of different regions, and depending on the round, only 3 of those are actually going to be available to take actions in. The way that all this is indicated is by the special area of the board where you have all these different colored tokens representing the different regions, and these are all randomly assigned at the start of the game, meaning that the order that each of the regions are going to be available is going to be different from game to game. But in the center here, you have this token that has the 3 different arrows on it that are going to be pointing at the 3 active regions. Whichever one it's pointing directly at is going to be free to use, whereas the 2 regions adjacent to it, you do have to spend a resource in order to perform the actions there. Another really cool aspect of this game is that each player is going to have their own personal player board that they're going to be able to upgrade and build an engine with throughout the game. And the way that this works is that each of these columns on the left here represent the different regions, and the way that you use this is that you can actually upgrade each of those individual columns in order to grant you more actions in that region. Not only that, but you can also upgrade each of these by putting different tokens in them, which will allow you to gain that special benefit or action or resource anytime that you perform an action in that region. But like I said, there are a bunch of different action locations out on the board, so it's really nice that you're only really considering 3 of them at a time. But the different action locations are going to allow you to gain different resources, gain different upgrades on your board, and like I said, grant you with more action points or even one-time use or ongoing abilities. And they'll also allow you to move up various tracks that will gain you different benefits, upgrades, or victory points. And you can also use actions to build different bridges and towers out on the board, which will grant you the benefits of the icons you're covering. And you're going to be taking those from your own personal player board and then putting those out in the particular region that you perform that action. Of course, there's all sorts of different other areas that you can slot in different tokens and tiles, and you're going to be gaining those by performing the different actions and having the appropriate resources. But those are essentially going to either grant you with other abilities or other opportunities for scoring victory points either throughout the game or at the end of the game. But of course, the different scoring opportunities that you create for yourself on your own personal player board are only going to be specific to you. And this is where another really interesting mechanism comes into play in contrast to that, because at the start of the game, each player is going to be dealt 5 different objective tokens, and these are going to be dictating some different endgame scoring potentials that could come into play. And the way that you actually make those become active is by playing them onto the main board. But the thing that's cool about those is that they're going to be dictating the endgame scoring for all the players. This means that the more influence you have on that board, the more you're going to be able to dictate what the endgame scoring opportunities are, and hopefully those benefit you more than your opponents. The player with the most victory points at that time wins the game, and if you are interested to check this one out, I do have it linked in the description down below. And that's it for this week, but don't leave yet because we still got a couple awesome giveaways to announce, and these are the easiest giveaways to enter ever. All you got to do is leave a comment down below, and that'll get you entered in on these prizes. And the first one we have is a pledge for the game Castle Up, which I think looks like a really awesome engine building game where players are going to be drafting different cards and then building those cards into your tableau, with each of those cards essentially acting like an additional action on your turn that you'll be able to use to generate more resources, get special actions, grant you with additional attack power, or even defend against other players. Destroying a player's building doesn't immediately remove it from their tableau. Instead, they'll have to spend some resources in order to rebuild it. But if it's attacked again when it's in that state, then it is completely destroyed. This is one that I'm actually pretty interested in personally, and it is a very reasonable price. But the only thing better than buying a game is winning it, and to enter this giveaway, all you gotta do is leave a comment down below with the hashtag Castle. And you can say anything that you want, but if you're looking for something in particular, maybe there's something that you're planning to build this summer to improve your castle, you could let us know in the description down below. For myself, I'm still working on making this place livable, but I'm hoping I at least have a living room at some point this summer. And this next giveaway is for something a little bit different because this one's actually for an RPG, and this one is called Night. This one looks really interesting because it's based on Arthurian legend, but it takes place in a post-apocalyptic future. So it's combining all these different elements to create a really interesting and unique environment that players are going to be able to explore. They're bringing the whole world together with some really impressive artwork, and it looks like they've put a lot of effort into this RPG over years and years of working on it, and they've also won a few awards as well. So I think this is a great opportunity to dip your feet into the RPG world if you haven't already. And this one is also bringing in a few unique elements like this really interesting combo system that allows you to enhance your actions with different characteristics that you're going to be choosing for your character. And this giveaway is going to be for the Digital Squire Pledge, which is going to get you everything that you need to play this game all in a PDF. And I'm going to run this one over on the Discord, which is just as easy to enter. All you got to do is check it out in the description down below. Click the giveaways channel and then click the emoji underneath that giveaway, and that'll get you automatically entered, which will be drawn at the end of the week. Good luck in the giveaways, but now let's go ahead and draw the winners for last week's giveaways, which was for a pledge for Power Vacuum, as well as a pledge for We All Take from the River. And to draw a winner, I use this fancy application here. All these extra names down here are bonus entries for my Patreon subscribers. If you do like this sort of content, you want to help support the channel and help make all these efforts a little bit more sustainable for me, I do have a link to that in the description below, and it does also get you a nice bonus with the extra entries into these giveaways. But let's go ahead and draw those comments and draw a winner. And the winner for Power Vacuum is Fraser Skomorowski, which is one of the supporters over on Ko-fi. So thank you so much for the support and congratulations on the win. I'll reach out to you and let you know that you won yourself a sweet pledge here. And let's just draw another winner for We All Take from the River. And the winner is what? Myself, apparently. So I think the only thing that makes sense is that the person I was responding to with that comment should be the winner of this prize. And in this case, it was GS24XOR. So congratulations on the win here. Just reach out to me at adam@shelfclutter.com and we'll get that pledge all sorted out. And that is everything I have for you this week. I hope you all had a fantastic week. And if you haven't watched the Fallout series yet, I do highly recommend it. It's really solid. And although it doesn't really follow any particular story from the games, I think they did a really good job amalgamating all the different story elements from the game and incorporating that tone that the games have. And I think I liked this one even more than The Last of Us, which I also thought they did a great job converting into a TV show. But Fallout is more consistently good throughout the entire series, where I felt like The Last of Us was weak in a few areas. But I'm really happy that they did the game justice because it is one of my all-time favorites. That's all I got for you this week, and as always, thanks so much for tuning in and supporting the channel. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.
Oh.